Sometimes the senior monks in Thailand will open up their talk with a saying, it's just saying, greetings, brothers and sisters in old age, sickness, and death. It's quite a beautiful greeting, a reflection, because it's, I think it's something that we often forget about ourselves, and we also forget about other people, that essentially all of us are related based on those three categories. There isn't any one of us that will in some way or another not age or sicken or die. And I guess there's a small possibility that someone could be born and die so quickly they won't actually experience sickness. But we could say their death would probably likely be the result of that, but possibly not. Either way, for most of us that live some time on this planet, we all experience that. And my own, what I take from this often is in my mind how this arises is just the very typical sense that it shouldn't be this way, or this isn't right, or when for example with sickness, when I get better, this isn't normal for the body to feel like this. And so today we had somewhat of a memorial meal blessing, meal offering for a friend of the monastery who's been offering dana here and practicing for several decades. And this was Cassidy. And it was quite beautiful to talk about her life, or celebrate her life in a way, and talk about the goodness of it, but also just the meaning of death and the meaning of the end of life, how to take that in. And we just heard a dedication for Julia's mom, who just passed away, and who Jeff had said had led quite a good and fruitful life. And she died of cancer, 4th stage cancer. And it's it's very, as well as Ying's grandmother, who died 3 weeks ago. So these are things that we sometimes will say, dedicating merit to them, or blessings, or chants, and we continue that in our minds. We try to bring them to mind, or our own friends and relatives as well. And I'm not sure how that reaches those who are listening, but it's not a comfortable endeavor for myself, just bringing in that notion of death, because it brings up that sense of the very poignant teaching the Buddha says, that all that is mine, beloved, and pleasing will become separated from me. And that includes our own bodies. And so most of us, it would be hard to understand how anyone listening would say they have not, in some way or form, been touched by death, human death. There has been some experience that they've had of losing someone in their life. And yet the reflection that comes to mind when this reminder comes around, whether it's very personal for us in our own life, or we just have these requests for chanting. We think of others who we know or we have heard of, we haven't met. My own sense is there's sometimes a pushing away, like, oh, right, because there I am. I'm also going to face this. I'm also going to deal with this factor in life. And as Lumpur was talking about today, in terms of it, it's a fear can arise because it's an unknown experience for us, unless we have remembered from a past life our own death, or for very rarely those who've actually gone through a near-death experience. Otherwise, there isn't much knowledge of what we can experience. It's hard to imagine. It's hard to get a sense of it, and it's always bound by our preconceptions, our beliefs, our own sense of it. We can't quite get a grasp on it because it's always something in the future. It's always some sankhara that we've created for ourselves when we try to conceive of death. It is that very conceiving that is a construction. So that's why the Buddha had so many means of trying to help us at least be very acquainted with it, and if not just for our own dealing with our loved ones or friends or those we know or those we don't know, it as well is so helpful for us to be acquainted with it for our own understanding the end of our life, which, as we all know, can take form at any point. And the thing that tends to be hard, and what I can really understand as people talk about this, is that as we begin to age, we start to see more clearly that we're losing certain aspects of that which we might be accustomed to thinking that it might last forever. Our faculties, our memories, our physical bodies working quite easily and well, even the natural healing abilities that our bodies have slow down. We might become more sick as we age. Our bones, our joints, things begin to ache a little bit more. But as what I was talking about with Ken today, actually, who was on alms round, is he and Bernie is another. Is his wife, Ken's wife, and so they were sitting with us and talking a bit about aging, and so Bernie's had some pretty strong back problems, and Ken has had a stroke. But Ken was relating to the fact that he says he doesn't quite feel so different than he did at 25. He just hasn't, in terms of energy, the energy is still there. It hasn't really wavered. And so we were talking about that as well, that we, sometimes there's a point. I've recently talked to some people who are in their 70s. They said they just hit a point where the energy has dropped. It just wasn't there anymore, and there wasn't anything that could be done to rectify that. It was just sort of seemed to be a natural aspect of hitting a certain bodily age. And so while we live with all these things, and or for some of us, this just hasn't kind of entered the picture for ourselves, or maybe we're ignoring it, we're not seeing it clearly. We sometimes miss opportunities so much to become very intimately acquainted with our bodies as changing forms, so that we can really lose, essentially, to a certain point, lose this fear of dying. And that comes from another thing that was spoken about today, was this ability to let go. And the hardest part about letting go of our sense of health in the body is that we so much identify with our bodies as providing us with goodness and pleasure and our own sense of energy and vitality. And I would say this is, for me, in terms of my own sense of practice, one of the things that I can see very much as a extremely strong attachment. And that's something that I understand, from this attachment, why it is so important to begin to let go, of the body in these particular ways. The sense that I identify with this body as mine, as some permanent and unchanging aspect of myself. And Lumpur also pointed out today that when we talk about letting go, we often talk about letting go as a means of like getting rid of. So I have to let go of this attachment. I just wish that I didn't have it anymore, so I'm just going to get rid of it. And that's not exactly what, or that's not what the Buddha really meant at all, Letting go comes from real understanding. It comes from a sense of giving up. So there's renunciation in there. There's understanding of what it is that we need to let go of. Why it's important for us to let go of it. What is there for us that would be beneficial. And it's really this craving that we're seeing as something that is really hampering our spiritual progress. And often we don't want to give up that craving for our own bodies, our own existence. So the Buddha, time and time again, over and over again, in so many of his teachings, this is what he's pointing to. Our identification with this physical form, our identification with what we've been speaking about this week, which are the khandhas, the sense of the form or the contact, the experience of contact, the experience of pleasant or unpleasant feeling, or neutral feeling, and then our perceptions that come up. There's this sort of sense, this impressions we get from our senses of just like sort of what something is. But then our minds move from that into what are called sankharas, and that's really this our sort of complex makeup of thought and construct and belief, our own understandings, our views. All of this comes up in the realm of sankharas, even emotions. These are all concocted and created forms. and we identify with all of them. And as we know these things, this is consciousness that's added, and we keep continuing to think of them as this is mine. These are my thoughts, my feelings, my experiences. And they can't be anybody else's, it must be mine. And we misunderstand that mine, what that mine is, that I, that self. But we keep concocting it, we keep creating it, conceiving it over and over again. And so that this is really where our strength of identity, our unwillingness to let go, our tenacity to this form comes from, and our very strong aversion towards death lies. So essentially the process by which the Buddha encourages us to really investigate this is by breaking up this continuity of how we understand and identify our bodies, ourselves as sort of having a permanent form. And he does this in so many ways. I mean, even just talking about the khandhas and examining the khandhas is a way, breaking up that experience, trying not to identify with it, seeing it so clearly as our experience is just a sense of these five aggregates put together. And the Buddha has all sorts of other techniques which he suggests. That is like corpse contemplation, and the Buddha will. This isn't just a practice for monastics. This is for everyone. So that again, this acquaintance towards death is very possible for us. And so it's not to create a morbid sense of what life is. It's to create a real sense of what life is, so that it becomes normal. It's not something that we hide from or that is hidden from us. And so it's probably obvious, very obvious to most people that who are listening to this, that this is just the idea of death and the body coming to an end is just so much. It's just a hidden experience for us. It's hard to find it, or if it is found, it's found in popular culture through things like horror, like a horror show or a horror movie, or in a form of like a crime show or something. And it's, there's a shock value of it, but there's also within this just a sense, oh right, this isn't me, this isn't about me, this is somebody else. I don't know if I've ever seen anything. I'm sure there's been something, but in popular culture where somebody's kind of involved in death some way, and then they come to a real breakthrough or understanding or questioning in that way. It's very rare because it's uncomfortable, and we want pleasure in what it is that we're experiencing from the world. So it's something that's just not pointed out. And age, of course, is the same way. We rarely see aging bodies. I think recently there's been some like exercise features or health things where they show very old men and women who have incredible musculature, and it's very strange to see. And even though it's possible, it's sort of brought up as an image of like, see, you're not gonna die. You can just keep being incredibly strong and healthy in your old age. But of course, even those people die. So when the Buddha suggests that we do something like corpse contemplation, that's not a morbid affair. If we're thinking of like a fascination with morbidity, but it's more so we can understand and become, as I've said, like intimately acquainted with death. So as we continue to age, it becomes a part of us that we're not really afraid of, but we're more, as Lumpur Sumedho often talks about, we're very interested in the process. It becomes interesting in and of itself, something to study, to be like kind of looked at from a sense of Dhamma fascination. To kind of investigate the truth of the Buddha's teaching. So he suggests that we imagine what happens to a body as it goes through the death cycle. And we do so with our own bodies. We imagine our own bodies in that cycle. You can imagine it now, right now. It's a bit hard for us because, many of us haven't, or most of us just haven't died yet in this lifetime. So how do you bring it up? How do you figure it out? But the Buddha, he does bring up imagery. He suggests what corpses look like, how they go through the process of death. Death is not a stagnant process. It's something that occurs over time. While consciousness might leave the body, the death or the slow form of the body moving into disintegration, it takes a while. It takes a bit of time to begin to bloat and rot. It takes some time for then insects to take over the body, vermin, animals to eat the body. And then eventually the skin and the organs, they either rot or they're eaten. And then all that's left is like flesh on bones with sinews. And the Buddha talks about how after that the muscles go away, but still there's still some blood and sinews left. Until eventually the skeleton is no longer held together by tendons and ligaments. Even those have gone away. And then the blood fades, the bones are white, and eventually they're scattered. But even then, it takes a while for the bones to turn to dust. I remember a Dhamma talk, or several Dhamma talks, where Lumpur has kind of gleefully stated, yeah, there's definitely one thing for certain, there's one thing you can really count on, and that's that all of us are just going to be completely blown into cosmic dust. We can be assured of that. We can be absolutely assured of that. And another thing that's helpful in this contemplation is to kind of have a sense of also death around, when you're going to die, how you're going to die. And so these kind of contemplations can help. The Ajahn has he does several contemplations where he brings people through their own death experience. One images or one story kind of brings people through is dying on a plane. And there's a violent death. Another is more common, just dying in old age. dying of cancer, heart attack. And if this is uncomfortable, speaking about these things, then as I would expect it might be, then that's all the more evidence of the need to try to learn as much as we can about our own conceptions of death, our own attachments to our body, so that when that occurs for us, either through our loved ones or ourselves, we're very prepared for that. Metika's death, being part of her death, was a very powerful experience. And she was. I was so just inspired seeing her go through this, because she wasn't really complaining about it in any way, even when it became very, very difficult in the end. And that was similarly how people were talking about Cassidy today. I had I guess I'd call it a flu or something about 5 days ago, and I just woke up and I felt really sick, really kind of, just the whole body was achy, and just woke up in the morning, and I think, I'm not sure how many of you can have this in common, but it's just like, oh, I don't want to do anything. I just want to get through this. And it was really hard to motivate myself to sit or do anything. Just would rather lie in bed. And what kept coming up is like, this will be over soon, or hopefully this won't last long. And there was quite a resistance to learning from that painful experience. And then on top of it, later in the day and into the evening, I had a thing that occurs to me, which is like it's like kind of a severe allergy attack, but it's like it happens like once every 6 months, and it's just incredibly painful. The chest closes up, and again, it just kept on being this feeling of I'll get through this, I'll get over it, and it's just so painful, and it only lasted about 2.5 hours, 3 hours. So I would look at my clock and just think, okay, hour and a half left, I'll be fine. And it was that one was actually quite painful. And so over and over, this experience occurred where I kept thinking, but this is just like what dying will be like, that, or might be like. I mean, it's not for sure, but being with those who have died, it's not usually a comfortable affair. It's not usually a pleasant affair. And so I was reflecting during that time, like, wow, like, how is it possible to really stabilize the mind through this pain? Because it is such a strong habit to think, okay, when this is over, when this is through, it won't be like this for long. And one of the statements today about one of the people who was dying is, why is it taking so long? I think that was something both Cassidy and Metika mentioned. And expect it to take so long to die. And the irony with all of this is that it's so easy to lose a sense of this or to distract ourselves and just continually forget that we're all going to be facing this, and at any time can get that diagnosis tomorrow. You actually have fourth stage cancer. So the amazing thing for me is just dealing with this tendency towards distraction from this, the reality of this experience, the reality of this happening. And I can say that it is the reason I became a monk. It's the reason that I wished to dedicate my life to the Buddhist teachings, was my own sense of fear around death. There isn't any one thing that I can pinpoint as high up on my list as that. That one definitely takes the cake. And so there's, I can see that there's dukkha around it. And yet the mind, has its ways to just, even though that's present, it's there. There's a real sense of, okay, yeah, this is something that is very real. It doesn't, it just disappears so easily. It's like slipping through a grasp, like a weak muscle, and not being able to kind of hold on to something. That perception, that clarity, memory, or bringing forth of the, just the inevitability of death. And so today I was just reminded of the importance of that, and how easy it is to get lost in all kinds of things. Right now I'm not without complaint around something that essentially I've volunteered for and I'm putting myself through, and that's going through a building process to replace 4 of the cabins here, the kutis that we have. And I can just see that the mind can get quite absorbed in the details and or worried about them, and it just, something like death, it's out the door. Something like sickness, just get it over with. It'll pass. And there is intentionality there. Something that I can become absorbed in, that is distracting, therefore leads to not having to deal with something that is unpleasant, like really having a deep understanding of death. Being acquainted with it. And there's such irony there, isn't there? There's sort of like, oh, that was the purpose of being a monk. Well, how can that slip through? Just because of craving and delusion continue to operate. And there is that sense of just, I guess it's like, I'd rather not. And each of us has, it might not be something like death, although I'd find it hard to believe that someone would be able to really say that there's just nothing there for them for death. They There's no fear, there's no relationship, they're fine, they don't care. You die tomorrow. It's possible, but for somebody who's not well practiced, I'd find it hard to believe. But we all have different things that we're dealing with, different things that become difficult for us. And so I think that for me it has been helpful to just highlight this in my own practice, and to try to continue to be aware of these elements that I'm talking about, this sense of how easy it is to cling to the body, and to not want things to change or fade. And this is especially true for those we love, those of us who have not yet lost their parents or a parent. And so it's very, very helpful to see that resistance, if it's there. Resistance to the study of death, the understanding of death. Because if we identify that, then we say, okay, yes, there's something that needs to be worked on. And then that kind of sense of inspiration, aspiration can occur for us in terms of like what would it mean to die a good death? What would it mean to be well prepared? I mean, if I ask you what the experience might be like if you are on a deathbed and you have no fear, wouldn't that be amazing? No fear about what are people going to do after you die, what's going to happen to them. No fear about your own sense of losing a body. Even that strong sense of aversion to the pain that might be involved in that loss. The physical pain, the mental pain. That aversion gone. And how that an aspiration for that, I think, is quite important. It's quite helpful. But I do believe in my own experience that it comes with a lot of work, a lot of effort in the direction of really facing those deep fears that we have, or our own attachments to the body. When lust is very strong, when we have lust for others, it's often very intertwined with our own bodies, or completely intertwined. We have lust for our own bodies, how they look, how young they are, how they appear, how to make them better looking. And it all comes down to this sense of I am. This is me. So we're trying to, again, not become fascinated with death in what people would call a morbid quality, like obsessed, or thinking about it in a way that really isn't helping us learn, but more the fascination is with real understanding and clarity, so that we're really making an effort in wiping away delusion, in being able to see our beliefs around permanence, our perceptions around it, our aversion around sickness and aging, loss of the body, to begin to see that clearly, to say, oh, aha, there it is. It's right there. Like a detective finding a clue. And when we really get that, when there's a real sense of it, then there is a liberative quality to it. We do have a sense of freedom that arises because we become less bound to our attachments, and our craving begins to die off, to die away. And so the dukkha is something that we are less bound to. Tonight, some of the monks asked if instead of midnight tea, that we could be a suba video, so a video of an autopsy. And so there'll be a visual experience of this. A visual experience of a body that is no longer living and is being seen and understood. So we can have, in that understanding, a perception of, right, this is like what it might be like for my own body to go through an autopsy. So I hope that will provoke some wisdom and clarity tonight, more understanding, and less distance from this sense that we have of death and dying. And I'll offer that for some words of reflection tonight.